Hi everyone, Dr. Dan Lawrence. The purpose of this video is to make some connections from classical rhetoric to the present day and also to talk about some graduate school options in rhetoric. Basically, what now? We're at the end of the course nearly. Um, we've looked at you know 2,500 years and more going back to Enheduanna, really almost 5,000 years of rhetorical history, and we've had to fast forward through quite a bit, of course, to bring us to the present moment. But rhetoric changes in the 20th century with Burke, basically. Uh, you have this theory of identification, and you have this idea that all symbolic communication can be persuasive and rhetorical. So really, the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans wouldn't really have bought that so much, it seems like, or they weren't thinking along those lines precisely, with the exception maybe of Quintilian, who again, seems to have suggested that he was a little bit more open minded about what persuasion can encompass. So we now have like the study of visual rhetoric. We recognize that images can be persuasive. We have this subfield of digital rhetoric, where a lot of my thinking resides in. We realize that computation can be persuasive. That's Ian Bogost, procedural rhetoric. Um, Dance can be persuasive, music can be persuasive. So we've expanded the horizon, and that essentially begins with Burke. But of course, there's like countless, Sonia Foss with visual rhetoric, and so many scholarly conversations. There have been more conservative scholars who have said, no, really, rhetoric is the study of oratory. Properly, it should be contained to this classical tradition of oratory. Um, that's been a minority of scholars, though. The overwhelming push has been to understand that rhetoric is a useful tool for thinking about persuasion across all different modalities and media. Um, if for nothing else, because it's just self-evident, right, that we persuade and create arguments across more than just speech. We use text, we use audio, we use visuals, we use mass communication technologies, we use emergent technologies, now artificial intelligence. There's so many things, right, that rhetoric helps us understand persuasion across different technologies and modalities and media. So that's where we've gotten to today. And then, of course, with Bitzer, recognizing that rhetoric is a rhetoric changes the way that you can change the way that you view the world, and bringing this kind of social, civic, political reality resurgence to, and think about the time period that Bitzer is writing in too. I mean, it's a very contentious, um, a contentious cultural, political kind of shift going on in the United States during the 1960s, right? Um, so very interesting things there, bringing us to this present. Like now we live in this very digital world, and rhetoric helps us understand digital messaging and advertising, and the way that we interact with technology and machines and screens to be able to analyze them, the messaging that occurs in those spaces. Okay, so rhetoric is kind of everywhere, right? And as I've mentioned many times before, even as a writer, if you're going to be a fiction writer, you're always thinking about rhetoric. You're thinking about audience very concretely. You're thinking about, how am I going to reach a specific demographic? You're thinking about who's going to read this, and what am I trying to say to them? And so that's why we have these contemporary ideas like everything is an argument. Even the clothes that you wear presents a particular argument about how you perceive yourself and how you want to be perceived. I'm failing in that department today, of course, but maybe it's a strategic choice, right? Maybe I'm trying to be approachable and to identify with you a little bit. There's a Burkean idea of identification, right? You see, I mean, really, you see, I remember President George Bush, putting on the hard hat and like shoveling for a photo op, a press kind of thing. It's like is that really George Bush? No, he's a wealthy, extremely wealthy individual who doesn't spend most of his time wearing a hard hat and shoveling dirt. But, right, it's a very strategic, conscious kind of choice to take a photograph and then, you know, and that's not a, that's, right, that's an analysis of a particular media phenomenon that applies to both political parties, right? I remember, some of the Joe Biden inauguration messaging was around his middle class upbringing. It's like that's so right now that's not the economic reality of Joe Biden, and who's a very wealthy individual. So it's about that's the Burkean idea of identification as the rhetor, the speaker, the writer, the individual creating the messaging is trying to identify with the audience, identify with the individual, and Burke's then spurs on this kind of revival in modern American rhetoric. Bitzer takes up that torch, and thousands of others, right? Thousands of other rhetorical scholars. So to transition then, where is rhetoric today? You know, in a really practical, pragmatic kind of sense, most rhetoricians are teaching classes like college composition. There's something like 20 million college students in the United States, and maybe with only a few exceptions, every U.S. college student takes a composition course, an introductory academic writing course, where they learn how to write arguments, how to cite their sources, how to do research. It's kind of these fundamental building blocks of academia, and rhetoric is the kind of foundational stone through which those classes are taught to varying degrees, right? I mean, I don't think there's a lot of composition courses where you're actually going to sit down and read Aristotle, and I lament that, but that's just the reality of it is you have to learn the mechanics of MLA style guide. Maybe that's, more immediately important for a lot of people than using your parenthetical citations and documenting your sources is more immediately actionable and practical than reading Aristotle, but I wish we could have it all. Okay, so if you want to keep doing rhetoric, there's a lot of options for you. You can go on to graduate school, do a master's degree in rhetoric and composition that'll qualify you to teach a class like college composition if that's something you're interested in. You can go on to doctoral level work if you're interested in the theory and the research of rhetoric. And I have slides in Canvas for you. I don't necessarily recommend doing that. I want to be really clear about that. I think it's a great sacrifice to go into academia. You have to really want to do it. The pay is not particularly good. Um, in a lot of cases, it's not livable even if you're adjuncting. You might not have health insurance. You'll be on contract work, so it's pretty dismal in terms of I wouldn't recommend going into academia unless you're like desperately passionate about your subject area, right? Um, that being said, every marketer, communicator, writer uses rhetoric, just not the terminology that historically has been applicable. But you're going to be there's no boardroom meeting, there's no marketing strategy meeting sitting around a table where people are discussing ethos, pathos, and logos by those names. But every company and every marketing department is thinking about audience and ethos and pathos and logos. I know this because I worked in marketing, right? So we were always talking about the credibility of our brand. We were like, how can we help the public? How can we help the region, the citizens of this region, trust our healthcare system more? Maybe our reputation isn't very good. as called brand management, right? How can we increase the perception of our, how can we positively increase the positive perception of our brand in the region and things like that? And then strategically creating specific messaging that's going to persuade people, based on evidence, right? Here's our leapfrog score, here's our safety data, here's our, patient stories that of successes of surgeries and things like that. We have really low infection rates or something like that. So, right, it's like that is absolutely rhetoric. That is rhetoric in a nutshell. It's a specific audience with a specific purpose and a specific message, and I'm using an appeal to try to, and maybe multiple appeals to try to get you to believe something, to try to persuade you of something, and it may or may not be true, right? And what is truth? And there's Plato, there's Plato right there in your face as ethics, and what should you be persuading people about, and how should you go about it? Oh, wonderful. So, if you like rhetoric, you can carry it with you. You go into fields like any of these things, like marketing, communications. Those are great careers for writing students, majors and minors, advertising, social media and digital media. You're always engaged in rhetorical scenarios. In your fiction work, you're always thinking about audience. You're thinking about who's going to purchase your books and how do you present yourself as an author. And there's just all these manifestations, right? All these manifestations of rhetoric that ripple through. Okay, I'm gonna cut myself off here. But, there's some slides in there for you. There are so many different areas to take this into, right? There's so many different styles of graduate programs, whether it's like strategic communication or technical writers are predominantly rhetorical thinkers. Technical writing and rhetoric are very wedded fields. Digital media and digital media theory, or, pure rhetoric, you want to study just rhetoric and composition and get into pedagogy and teach writing, then rhetoric is if you want to be a writing teacher at a university and teach composition someday, then going and getting a graduate degree in rhetoric and composition might make a lot of sense for you. So, those are all different options and things you can do with rhetoric. And then there's the direct, immediate career applicability. Hopefully this class has introduced you to a lot of concepts for thinking strategically about rhetorical ideas like audience, like the appeals. It's also, of course, given you a sense of ethics and broad historical timeline, and then realizing just that, rhetoric is so much more than just ancient Greeks giving speeches on street corners, right? That it's this really useful, practical, everyday, applicable tool for, designing and analyzing messaging as well. I mean, I would even argue it's a kind of mode of approaching reality, of arming yourself against being persuaded by political parties, by companies, by disinformation. It's like be always skeptical, be always analyzing what people are saying and trying to get you to do, right? Everyone wants you to buy something or vote for someone or go somewhere or travel to this destination or that destination, and they use ethos, pathos, logos, the emotion they use, attempt to use evidence of, this is the best course of action for you. And so rhetoric in that way is a protective, it's a critical framework for looking at life. It's a critical framework for looking at language and reality and everything around you. So I hope that's come to light too. I hope that you see that, rhetoric is not just stuffy Gorgias giving his demonstration speech on a street corner. It's this kind of lived, everyday, critical framework for thinking about your writing, thinking about your communicating, thinking about your audience, thinking about your strategies, and how you're presenting your language and yourself, and you're articulating your being in the world. Okay, that's enough. Take care of yourselves, everybody. Good luck.